I don't usually start out this way, but I have to say I'm so impressed. We are kindred spirits, obviously. You're not just interested in and giving time to conservation and advocacy and activism, but that seems to be your primary goal in life as an organization. And it's very, very impressive. And to look out at all of you and know that's what you're doing and doing it together. Congratulations and thank you. Thank you. I don't think there are many bad things. I don't think there's any bad thing I can say about having studied birds like these raptors, water birds that we're also working on now. Well, let's try this one. There it is. Did you do that already? Okay. I was not or something. What can I say bad about a career studying these things, except collecting data explicitly to inform good management, science-driven conservation, and have it not be used for whatever reasons. We don't have the resources to apply it, the interest isn't there, the connections aren't made, we have so many other things to do. So by you recognizing the importance of these things. Next slide, please. These are some of the species that we've been studying at ARCI. We're really grateful for that, and for taking the messages to your policymakers and agency managers. Boy, just when you have people like Scott giving it to you, 52886 water, okay? He's done all the hard work, directing us to have an impact, a simple message that will have an impact. Please take that to heart, please do that. I'm going to move quickly through the year of the swallow-tailed kite, and I'll finish up with just a few slides, a couple of slides on I think 3 other species that we're putting a lot of work into right now. Let me try this thing again. You got it working?
Is the little USB plugged in? There was that little USB that handheld thing works off.
Here we go. This will be better, I think. Okay, so I first got interested in swallow-tailed kites because of this fact. Upper left is the historic distribution in red, all the way up into Minnesota. Believe it or not, this bird nested all the way up into the tamarack swamps of Minnesota. Not surprising when you really think about what they nest in Florida, not in a botanical sense, or not in a taxonomic sense, species sense, but in the terms of the physical structure of the habitat. They're like mature wetland forests. These are habitats that support a lot of prey diversity, but they also provide some protection from predators approaching on the ground, etc. So what we have is a pointer. Excellent. What we have is, there we go. Everything's working now. Okay. So what we have is 21 states occupied prior to 1900. From 1900 to 1940, this range contracted dramatically, and presumably so did the numbers of swallow-tailed kites, so that we have what you see in the lower right, just 6 states now, and it has been this way since about 1940. And this is the reason, this is one of the main reasons that we are going to have to stay vigilant about this bird. I'm going to tell you some things about their population trend, things that we've learned by studying them since 1988. In 1989, 88, I started nesting biology studies because it just hadn't been done. And that was with support from the State Wildlife Agency, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. But in 1989, started monitoring large communal roosts that form right before migration. And that has turned into now a 27-year population monitoring program that actually reflects the status of the whole U.S. population, because we think we're actually looking at 70% of the kites in this country on a given morning in July when these roosts peak. And I'll show you how we do that in a few minutes. This is going on now as we speak, or at least it will again in the morning. This is a male on the right, courtship feeding a female. And like the limpkin, like every other species of birds and animal that reproduces, which is all of them. These sorts of things help build the bond. They also provide the resources. There's an exchange here. The male will come in with food. The male will come in with nest material. The female will take the nest material and work on her nest over here just outside the picture. She'll eat the food. He'll go back out while he's getting more. She'll eat. She'll work on the nest. This will go on several deliveries, and then he comes in and she's crouched in a copulation posture. She's ready to mate. So they mate. It's rather quick. He flies off and gets more food, gets more nest material, comes back. Every so many trips, they mate again. Within a few days, if necessary, we've seen a nest completed and eggs laid the next day. A nest built in one day and eggs laid the next day. They were in a hurry. It's not usually quite that quickly, but they probably knew each other. And you laugh, but that's a very important fact, and I'll just get it out up front. This species is highly social. Swallow-tailed kites don't do anything alone. Obviously, they don't reproduce alone, but obviously they feed together, they nest together, they sleep together, they travel together on migration. They go out in flocks and look for prey, and once they find it, they feed together. If one bird's not finding much, they see over there 1.5 miles away, they can see this black and white bird quite well. They go on a beeline. That's why you'll see them just suddenly appear somewhere. They might catch a few things, grabbing a knoll out of the trees, and all of a sudden they just seem to evaporate. It's probably because they saw other swallow-tailed kites that were doing better than they were, or at least they thought so, and they zoomed on out there. But this business of knowing each other, I'm going to have a pretty picture of it, at least when I'm talking for a long time about this subject. This business about knowing each other, people often ask, almost invariably people ask, do they mate for life? And the answer is yes, if it works out. If they both come back to the same place where they nested the year before, they will nest again because they know each other. There is a relationship there. And so they can, in fact, mate for life if both of them survive as long as the other. Unlikely they're both going to pass in the same year. So the fact that they're social is very, very important because that gives them specific places that they come back to and find each other so they can have the advantages of hunting together, the advantages of mating with a familiar bird, the advantages of going out and feeding in a flock where they stand to catch much more prey than if they just go out and do that by themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So, important message. But I should say this so I don't forget. When you have an animal, as most animals, tied to specific places, and if we marked enough, oh gosh, house sparrows, you know, fire ants, we would see the same site fidelity, the same adherence, the same sense of place being very important. And that should not be surprising. Think about how we are. We may have more than one home, but we don't just wander around. There are some nomadic cultures, but most are not. And even nomadic cultures, they have their favorite places where they meet, they have places where they find resources like water, et cetera, et cetera. So we're safer, we do better by being social. We might not think that all the time, especially if we get forced into being social. Okay, so, oh, there it is, yeah. That's the male landing on the female's back, and they copulate, and when he leads her back, he just launches, it's really beautiful, he launches himself over her head and down toward the ground with his wings folded. And he calls as he does this. It's very stereotyped, very, it's like aerial ballet. Just goes off, wings in, down toward the ground to pick up speed because they're not strong flyers, remember that. They can glide all day. Now that's finesse, but that's not strength necessarily. It's endurance and finesse, but it's not being buff. He dives at the ground as he picks up airspeed, pops his wings out, gets lift and comes up above the trees and flies off. And he calls as he does that. And he'll do that over and over. And you can see that. If you see a kite carrying nest material, if you hear them vocalizing, if you see more than one kite together, especially at this time of year, if you see them carrying food or nest material going in a particular direction, they're heading toward their nest. You can find that nest if you follow them, get a little bit closer each morning, and eventually you'll be rewarded with seeing a nest. You won't get quite this view taken from a helicopter by my good friend Deborah Jansen, who was out tracking panthers in an aircraft and took that picture. These eggs are beautiful, as all eggs are. I think they're just amazing structures and things. But swallow-tailed kite eggs were considered especially beautiful and especially rare because There just were never lots of them, even when they were in 21 states. That may be part of the reason they declined. In the Victorian era, late 1800s, early 1900s, egg collecting was a big deal. Someone just gave me a book that a library was giving away on the study of bird eggs just last month, and I saw in there a copy of an old a figure from the book. The book was 1920 or so, and it had a list of the prices that were paid for clutches of eggs of different species. The most valuable clutch of eggs came from California condors. $320 for a clutch of eggs in 1904. But the second most valuable, and way ahead of everything else, was the swallow-tailed kite. $40. I used to tell people, yeah, $15 an egg. Well, a clutch of 2 would go for $40. And that's a lot of pressure on a resource if someone can make that much money. Now remember, they're social. They nest in groups of 2 to 5 pairs. We call that a neighborhood. And so if you find one nest, you're very likely to find more nests. And if you wipe out all those nests, if you take all the eggs, there's no reproduction. It's very unlikely that all those pairs are going to choose that same place to nest again. So their neighborhood, their kinship, and perhaps to some degree genetic relationship, that basket of relatedness and connectedness and knowledge of each other, familiarity, it's fragmented. The same thing happens if the kites come back after a long migration, and you'll see it is a long migration. Same thing if they come back and their nesting site has been clear-cut, for instance, or bulldozed to build something, et cetera, et cetera. And in the 6 months that they're gone, that certainly can happen. Okay, here we go, a little quicker. Please. These, all the great pictures are not by me, and a lot of them are by Max Stone or Jim Gray, who have been very kind to donate. They are not only wonderful photographers, they are the most ethical professional photographers I know, and that's why we love working with them, and we will continue to do so. So these young are maybe 18 days old, something like that. You can see the nest is kind of a messy affair, but you also can see that it's up nice and high. And one reason we think that's true, they like to be up where there's big adjacent limbs that they can sort of stick the nest down in, a lot of support. They're not like a red-tailed hawk building a nest with a lot of sticks that are intertwined, that are sitting up there on a single limb. You know, they build nests with small twigs, usually in a pine, but with cypress twigs, because if you're flying, I don't know this from first-hand experience, but you can snap them off. Snap a live cypress twig, it'll break. We have broken big limbs off of cypress trees setting a rope to climb up to a nest. That only happened one time. Then the rule always was, before the climber got on the rope, 3 people, or the 2 biggest guys, would hang on the rope, get off the ground, and make sure the limb didn't break. So live cypress limbs, and especially twigs, will snap easily, but even dead pine twigs will not. So what they build their nests out of are cypress twigs with a whole bunch of old man's beard and Spanish moss. Old man's beard is more green. So they build a nest with a cup in it, they lay the eggs in it, but gradually, because the young defecate in the nest, they don't shoot out over the side like more advanced raptors. And that reminds me to tell you, genetically, swallow-tailed kites are considered at the root of the family tree of raptors. They're the most ancestral raptor, not just in the United States. So they build these great nests, but gradually, to cover up all the feces, the parents keep bringing nest material. It gets filled in, actually gets sort of convex, and it becomes a dangerous place for the young as they grow, and the nest is kind of falling apart on the sides, and it gets windy, and the young often blow out of the nest, and that's one big cause of death. They're up high also probably to avoid fire, because they nest through May and June, the natural fire season in a place like Florida. And as I said, it supports the nest as well, but it also, here's a nest in Fakahatchee Strand that a fire went under this nest at night, and the next morning the female was still on those eggs. Those eggs went on to hatch. And you can see she is just above where the foliage was scorched. Fires tend to move slowly at night because there's not a lot of wind, so you think, oh, it's cooler, not going to do as much damage. They actually can do more damage to the foliage at night because they move very slowly and they're under the foliage longer. So I'm told. This is an adult, probably a male, bringing in food to his young that are already pretty big and don't need their mom to feed them anymore. but again, up near the top of the tallest trees. So this makes them vulnerable to predators, but it also makes it easier for them. And they literally do. They get up in the morning when there's enough air rising, enough breeze for them to have lift, but they don't need to come down. They hunt on the wing, they eat on the wing, they'll drop the food off quickly and keep going. Truly a creature of the wind. And they have those big wings. They have a 4-foot wingspan. You know, they're so swift in the air, you just don't realize that they're that big. But they also have a lot of surface area. The tail probably provides lift, but it also acts as a rudder. They can turn very, very quickly. And if you watch them catching food, they do things that you could never do in an airplane. You would probably watch the wings be the last thing you see, is watching the wings fly off the airplane from all the forces placed on that structure. And yet birds like kites can do that every day and appear to be having a great time. So, you know, you can see the nest is getting smaller still, but it's clean up there, not underneath. You can take this nest apart. 50% of the weight of that nest is sticks, the rest is epiphytes. Spanish moss and old man's beard. So having those species of epiphytes in the environment is very important. The kites won't nest where they don't have that. If they build a nest out of sticks, it would fall apart. They have small bills, small feet, just not built for it. So you see the brown, that's camouflage, that will fade in the sunlight. They will be stark white and black by the time they leave the nest, maybe a little color left. But again, you see they're right up there above the canopy. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of slides that Gina Kent put together. And you know, I must have blown through or forgot to include a slide that has a picture of Gina Kent, who's worked with me now for 18 years. And is responsible for managing all the field work now that ARCI does. I manage the desk. That's my domain, unfortunately, not by choice. But Gina put together a series of slides, which any of you are welcome to borrow. It's probably about 30, 35 slides. But here's just a few to give the people advice on what to look for if you're trying to find nests or want to monitor nests. And so, you know, the behaviors that I mentioned, like calling, carrying sticks, carrying food, copulating. These are what the nests look like in the red circles. Up near the tops are one of the tallest trees. They might not be the most impressive looking trees. In fact, they like old trees that have started to open up, not necessarily beautiful bushy crowns. But they'll nest in other trees as well. They'll nest in hardwoods, oaks, sweet gums, they'll nest in cypress, but they do best, they have the highest success rates in pine, and that's what they use the most. If you see this, most of the bird's body is invisible down against the nest, but you see that head, that bird is probably incubating. And usually they'll remain very, very still. They almost look like they're in a meditative state. And that may be a way that they deal with being so motionless when they're so used to being all about motion. That's purely conjecture and not science. And when you use the word meditative in a sentence, you know we're going somewhere over there. So when they get to brooding, this is what you'll see. You know, she's up higher. And of course, you won't be up this high, but you'll be seeing from the ground, more of the female is over the nest and more of the back is visible. She's got young, you'll start seeing her put her head down in the nest more. She's tending to the young. And this is what you don't want to see, but unfortunately happens a lot. This is a result of predation by an aerial predator, most likely a great horned owl. That's the swallow-tailed kite's most serious threat. And
didn't break the phones though.
No. No, the bird's phone survived. That's very good, thank you. I'll remember that. A size reference there, the telephone. Recently fledged young, they've got shorter tails. And so do adults when they start to molt. Their long tail feathers are the first to go. So you might see a short-tailed bird, could be a young, could be an adult. But the way you tell them apart is the young bird has this beautiful, all these beautiful new feathers, no loose ones, no gaps, no holes from lice or anything like that. This is perfect swallow-tailed kite nest habitat in big cypress, a mosaic of different species of trees. It's got hardwood hammock, big mature closed canopy forest, wet prairies, maybe some dry prairie in there, cypress, dwarf cypress. Lots of habitat diversity that supports a lot of prey diversity. What mimics that situation, artificial habitat, is large industrial scale managed timberlands. Now, this is not something I would like our world to look like, but The good news is this habitat does support swallow-tailed kite nesting. And again, it's because, I think, the physical structure is very similar. So they find the nest sites that they want, but they also find the prey that they want because there is a lot of edge. There's a lot of older forest, younger forest, hardwoods, pines, pine islands that the kites nest in because they emerge above all the other trees, et cetera, et cetera. So we have actually spent a lot of time working on kites on timberlands so that we could provide meaningful, affordable, feasible, non-threatening, but effective, how's that, management recommendations. We've got one document that lists 11 of these things, and they all have the forester's interest because they're all things that they can do. The number one that works best is a pine plantation, thin it. Take out every 4th row, maybe at 15 years, maybe do it again at 18 or 20 years. And what you get is more water, more nutrients, and more light getting to the trees adjacent to that removed row. And before you know it, you've got an uneven structured pine forest of what the kites love. Remember, they like that emergent tree. They want to be above the fire. They want to be out in the wind. They want to be where the tree opens up. They want to be able to get in and out. Kites can try to land on a nest in a moderate to strong breeze and actually have trouble landing because they're hitting a small, like a helipad. And they have to get in between the limbs. And they don't have a lot of power like a red-tailed hawk. They've got these very, very light wings for gliding. We put video cameras up in a lot of nests to learn about prey, and we had actually got some America's Funniest Videos sorts of things, of kites trying to land. They come in, they get hit by a breeze, and they wind up striking the side of the nest and disappearing out of the picture. Embarrassing, but we don't show those pictures. A baby bird, yeah. So this reminds me, fortunately for your, I look at the slides so I can remember what to say. They eat a lot of variety. All year round, kites can live on insects. And they eat everything from big things, cicadas, grasshoppers, dragonflies, all the way down to, people have found in their stomachs, the wing stage of fire ants. Once the ants emerge and are swarming, that's small stuff, but if you eat enough of it, it's a lot. Kites look like, they have this very gentle appearance because they're mostly feathers. They have a very, very small skeleton. They have a lot of feathers because a lot of the insects they eat actually bite and sting. And some of them, especially in the tropics, kites occur all the way down into South America. Some pretty dangerous insects. A large person would not do well getting bitten by one of them. So when they're nesting, though, it's not efficient to carry back a lot of insects. So what they do is they hunt small vertebrates that live in trees. Kites don't go down to the ground, they don't catch rabbits, they don't catch squirrels. They catch things out of the air, insects, or off the foliage of the trees. So they catch tree snakes, tree frogs, day roosting bats, and baby birds. They'll occasionally take a live bird, an adult bird rather, a flying bird, but mostly they take baby birds, and sometimes they'll even bring the entire entire prey nest back to their nest and feed their young, the babies, out of the other nest. I know. It's the way it is. We don't judge it. It's just the way it is. If they do that, bring back that whole nest, and often what you'll see them bringing back is blue-gray gnatcatchers, and they get a lot of cardinals too, open cup nesting birds that can be reached toward the outer part of the canopy of the tree, the crown of the tree. What they'll do then is they'll take that empty bird nest after they've fed all the young pairs, and they'll work it into their own nest as nest material. So when you take a kite nest apart, you'll often see blue-gray gnatcatcher's nests, which look like hummingbird nests on steroids. Same sort of idea where they take pieces of lichen or whatever and a lot of things and with saliva and stick it on the nest. Are beautiful. Probably more beautiful when they have baby birds in, but it's, like I said, we're not going to judge them. It's not a mistake that there's a great horned owl in this picture. The idea here is that is the major predator of this bird. And not only do they take the baby birds, but they kill the females at night on the nests, especially on moonlit nights. I know, it's poetic in an unfortunate way. And think about that. If you're raising livestock, the cohort, the demographic fragment of your population, the breeding females, they are the most productive, the most valuable, that resource in that herd. Well, same with swallow-tailed kites. The great horned owls have the greatest impact on this population by taking the breeding age females. And that's when you see those piles of feathers and the occasional cell phone. So great horned owls, what a fantastic bird. What an amazing killing machine, you know. Look at the size of the feet when they're open. And this is a male, this is a relatively small bird, but you know, look at the size of the toes there. When that foot is open, especially a female, it's like that. And the talons are needle sharp and very strong, and they curve back in. If that bird grabs anything, including your hand or your arm, you will need a lot of help at extracting yourself. So we caught some great horned owls up in South Carolina in an area where kites had moved in and were actually relatively numerous, and all the nests in one area, the 3 nests, were depredated within 3 nights. A week after we were alerted to this area and came out, found 3 nests with the landowners. So we started studying great horned owls. That was sort of it's partly a catharsis, I guess, for us. We wanted to try to identify management recommendations for these property owners who were very serious about managing their land well for wildlife. We wanted to be able to make recommendations for them on how they could minimize the interactions, the co-occurrence of great horned owls and swallow-tailed kites. And we did learn some things by tracking the owls. This is the home ranges of 5 great horned owls. These are each color here, red and pink. As you go from pink to red, that's 1 owl, and it's more concentrated where the circles are darker. So there's 5 overlapping home ranges here. The red dots represent a total of 6 swallow-tailed kite nesting attempts. This is where the 3 nests were that were depredated within 3 nights. It was in a pine forest that had been recently burned. This is out in the swamp, and the nests up there in that corner were in a pine forest that was not being burned, had a very, very well-developed mid-story and understory. And the conclusion that we came to was that these birds are, and those 3 nests that were taken, the first one was on a full moon night, they, when an area is burned, a pine forest naturally burned relatively frequently, that's the kind of habitat that great horned owls love, because they can sit on a nice pine branch up high, they can listen for rodents running around, there's no plants in the way, there's no foliage in the way. They can hear the ground, they can see the ground, and they can dive straight at it. They don't occupy forest that hasn't been burned, where you've got tall pine trees, but you've got a lot of ground cover. You know, everything in the blueberry family, and myrtle, and palmetto, and etc. Mid-story stuff, oaks coming up. You're not going to find great horned owls there, and that's where you will find kite nests. I had a great technician who early on told me this without knowing any of this. We hadn't gotten to this point yet. He said, you know, kites don't want to nest where they don't want to nest where they can see the ground. And that turned out to be pretty prophetic. So what we have found is that kites on publicly owned managed pine forests, they move out after those places are burned, prescribed fire. Big cypress, this is one of the big lessons I learned there. We'd have these kite neighborhoods of as many as 5 nests, 2, 3, 4 years, and then the Park Service would go through and burn it. No kites for several years, and they would gradually move back in as that understory and midstory came up. So it's a real simple but very important management recommendation that wasn't very well received, because people thought I was saying don't burn your pine forest at a time when ecologists were telling land managers burn your pine forest. Well, the distinction is don't burn all of it at the same time, and burn it in a way that looks like a natural situation. I'm saying this because some of you probably are land managers. I know some of you are. But it's an important message. I'm not saying don't burn it, but if you've got wet patches of pine with a lot of midstory and understory, exactly what you have on industrial timberland, commercial timberland, they never burn. It's too expensive, and it's too much liability. If smoke goes across the highway, there's an accident, they get sued. So burn it in the growing season when it's wet, and it'll burn irregularly. Not everything will burn in that 100 acres all at the same time. What's gotten popular, aerial ignition from a helicopter machine that pops out ping pong balls with napalm in them, basically. That's an oversimplification, but as that ball goes out, it gets punctured, and there's a catalytic reaction, and it goes down, and it lights the ground on fire. Well, you can burn every square meter of every square hectare of that land that way in an afternoon. But that's not how natural fires usually occur, because they happen in May and June when we're starting to get some rain. They're ignited by lightning at a time when we're starting to get some rain. So mimic nature and leave those unburned patches alone, and you'll have swallow-tailed kites. This is in Big Cypress, and it actually is an area where we had a neighborhood of 3 nests, and the Park Service did a great job burning it. They were very proud of it, and most of those pines will survive. They're fire adapted, but the kites were gone for several years. This is Gina going up a tree, something she does, one of the many things she does extremely well, and this is kite habitat. Look at this. There's a little open patch here, but otherwise not great horned owl hunting habitat. This is a young bird down here, and Gina's going up to lower bird down so that we can put a little radio transmitter on it. This is Gina. This is Amanda Powell, and I'm the useless guy getting there last. There's 2 30-foot aluminum poles here with a mist net strung between them, and a live great horned owl down here who's disabled, and this is her job. She gets to do this once a year, and the rest of the year she has a great life. But she seems to really enjoy this. It's rather exciting because the kites dive at the owl without hitting it, and they get caught in the net. So this is done near a kite nest. It doesn't work as easily as I just said in that one sentence, but it can happen right away. You know, you can set up the net, put out the owl, and you can have a kite die before you even get in the blind, or you can sit there every morning for 3 weeks and not catch a bird. And that's why it's so special when you finally do. Oh, so up here, there's a 4-foot wingspan swallow-tailed kite with a satellite transmitter right there. A whole lot of what we do, the questions that we need to answer, telemetry of one form or another tends to be very helpful. So we've done a lot of satellite tracking, we've done a lot of VHF, old-fashioned radio tracking. We now have these devices, these satellite transmitters, which collect GPS fixes, locations, latitude and longitude, within 10 meters accuracy, and then store those and then send them up to satellites. We now have transmitters that collect and store those GPS fixes but send them to cell phone towers. And there were like Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. Manager wanted to know of the blue parcels that were available, he could buy them. And this was a year when he happened to have money. This was not recently. We put our satellite data over this, his map. We put our model over, the dark green is primary nest habitat. He wanted to know what parcel to buy, and he looked at this and immediately said, buy that one. And it was the most cost-effective use of your money. This is on the National Wildlife Refuge. So these are just some examples of that's the goal. We're not doing basic research. It's sure, and it's interesting to learn all about the science of anything, I think. But the goal here is it all has to be applicable to management and conservation. So we've gotten through the nest season. We're finishing up that part of the year, but the birds are gathering in large pre-migration roosts. This is an amazing phenomenon, and I have to watch my watch because we get thrown out of here at 9 o'clock. We all have to be out. So they gather in these large, this is a morning flight coming up off of a large communal roost near Lake Okeechobee. And this is a detail from that. This is part of the large roost at Fish Eating Creek, which, okay, so here are the numbers. We used to think up until a few years ago there were 5,000 swallow-tailed kites in the United States. That's okay, but it's not a big population. Something on the order of about 2,000 or 1,800 pairs. We now know from monitoring these roosts systematically that there's more than that. This is Fish Eating Creek flowing out to Lake Okeechobee in the background. And this is what the kites are doing over these wetlands during the day. They're mostly catching insects. They're not feeding young now. They're getting ready to migrate. And they're able to put on a lot of fat very quickly by spending their mornings, their days together foraging over habitat that looks like this beautiful, beautiful habitat. And they rise up, they get up in these big kettles, and then they split up into smaller groups, but still in groups, and they go out and they forage during the day. These purple circles are the 12 largest roosts that we have found in Florida that we have incorporated into a monitoring protocol. The idea here is, we started these flights in 1989, but since 2006 we've been focusing on the same set of 12, plus or minus 1 or 2. Which I will show you in a minute. We do it on the same dates in late July every year, 4 days, 3 days apart. And we fly high enough and far enough off of the kites not to cause them to flush. We don't want to make them fly because they are there to rest, to get fat, eating during the day, rest at night, because they're going to be flying 5,000 miles to South America, southern Brazil. So what do we come up with from all this? We get these pictures. On these 4 mornings in late July, we send up 3 small airplanes, each with a pilot and an observer. We each go to different roosts, 4 per airplane. And we take pictures like this and then come back and count the heads. And we have very, very accurate counts. And we're doing this simultaneously. It's synchronized and simultaneous, so we're not double counting any birds. They're all down for that hour and a half in the morning. We're zooming around as fast as we can to get all of our respective set of roosts counted, photographed. And the roosts move over time. Fish-Eating Creek actually consists of 6 to 8 different sites within an area of about 3 to 6 miles. So there's that 6 to 8 different clumps of birds that number up to almost 4,000 in the last few years. So we keep an eye on our satellite data at this time of year, and we look for nighttime fixes like that one. So after I finished my 4 roosts one morning this past last summer, we flew to this point. We didn't see any roosting kites, so we started doing concentric circles out. We got down here, and we saw this. We saw this. So there was, at the peak, there would have been over 1,000 swallow-tailed kites here. So we added a new roost, which was good because we had lost one a few years before, and I'll show you why in a second. This is fairly academic, but the point here is, through time, peaking in July, this is what the roost numbers look like, roughly. This is hypothetical, but what we did last summer was we made our counts on more than just 4 days at Fish-Eating Creek. We did it where these red dots are. So we could build a very, very accurate curve. And by building that accurate curve and counting how many birds you would expect to have in that roost on every single day in this 3-month period, dividing that by the average stay of a satellite tag bird in this roost, we come up with total occupancy. Not just how many birds were there at the peak, which was 3,683 last year, but how many birds were there over this whole period. And we're still trying to refine this estimate, but it's on the order of 15,000 instead of just 4. So when you add up, this is the largest roost. The U.S. population is obviously bigger than 5,000 birds. But here's the good news, and this is the first year that I have told anybody since January. Swallow-tailed kites in the U.S. are gradually increasing, slowly but steadily, and they are not reoccupying any of their historic range, which is disturbing. Why did that happen, and why are they not reoccupying? So they remain vulnerable. I love it. Someone up here is taking. Oh gosh, not to embarrass you. I think this is wonderful. Thank you. And I'll be glad to fill in any blanks or answer any questions. Someone's taking notes. How many of you are taking notes? Okay. So here are 4 pictures of 3 different roosts, all of which have been disturbed. And this is Lake Woodruff National Wildlife Refuge, huge, which has been the target of professional photographers and tour guides who are taking pictures of kites drinking water here in the morning. This is a dead-end creek, and the refuge is making moves right now to have jurisdiction to close off this creek. People can still go to the mouth of the creek and see all the kites. But what started happening is one of these tour guide leaders in particular charges $2,500 per person for 2 days, morning and evening, going out and going right up under the kites so people can photograph them drinking water. And to get the kites to move closer to the boat, this person takes a cigarette boat, radio-controlled cigarette boat, with a most ridiculous-looking model on the back of a swallow-tailed kite drinking water on the top of this boat, and zooms it around and gradually pushes the kites over closer to his boat so that his clients can get better pictures. That's coming to an end, we hope.
Where's Lake Woodruff?
Where's Lake Woodruff? West of Daytona Beach. It's on the St. Johns system. It's actually part of the St. Johns River before the St. Johns River looks more like a river. So these are our 3 largest roosts: Lake Woodruff, Fish-Eating Creek, the two pictures on the bottom, and Lake Helen Blazes, west of Melbourne. Helen Blazes is the 1800 kite roost that's been totally abandoned because it's in this impoundment, which is a duck hunting destination. And to keep the water open so they have a lot of ducks and a lot of hunting leases that they sell, the private landowner started spraying this water with a permit to kill the cattails so there'd be more open water. We didn't know that was happening, but in 2014, this roost was gone. Instead of 1,800 kites, 0 kites. The next year, we went out a little earlier to try to find where the kites may have moved to. We have never found them. But the first morning that next year, we saw this helicopter. Mac happened to be with me. He got a photograph where we could read the registration number, and the truck that was parked about a mile away that had the herbicide and the fuel for the helicopter. Again, a legal permit. But the landowner didn't know they were doing this, but the kite's abandoned and they've never come back. Fortunately, the other roosts in our sample, the other 11 roosts in the sample, 3 of them in particular have grown larger. So the overall number is the same as when that roost was active. That's really good news. But the fact that this can happen so easily, again, it's that place. It might be centuries that swallow-tailed kites have been roosting in that place. But obviously they were frightened enough. They haven't come back since. So we've monitored in 15 and 16 and haven't seen them anywhere. And the last case of these 3, the largest of the roosts, Fish-Eating Creek down here, these trees were all killed very abruptly by, we think, water flowing out of a sand mine right here. You know, there's a wildlife management area north of this levee. The south is privately owned. Land is leased to CEMEX, the Mexican cement company that mines sand and lime rock in Florida. And they use hydrochloric acid in the mining process, and hydraulically pumped down in the ground, and apparently, we think, at least, that it killed these trees. That's happened elsewhere. I have this ellipse here to show you this detail here. So that happened 2 years ago, and that next year, I was out there to take pictures, the last day of the season, and arrived, and here's a helicopter circling this area right here where most of the kites were, and flushing them. These white dots you see are kites in the air, and there was a photographer on the left side of the helicopter taking pictures. So that's something that will probably not happen again either. Unbeknownst to the photographer who landed at an airport close by to refuel. That's the airport that we were based at and we're flying back to, and we had a conversation. This is the roost that was abandoned up by Melbourne. That is not a fiction.
By where?
Protected land.
No. It's owned by the Deseret Corporation. It's going to be developed. But had they known, they probably would not have done that, or it would have been simple. They could have done it at a time when the kites weren't there. Yeah. And so now we know, and we're talking to each other. I don't think the kites will come back, but we'll see. Okay, so we put satellite transmitters on them, we put other kinds on, but mostly satellite tracking. I'm going to show you their migration. This is what they do before they leave Florida. They're using roosts. Pink is one bird, yellow is another bird. They got these focal areas where you see a cluster of these GPS points. These are GPS fixes, very accurate. And eventually, as they move down Peninsula Florida, they get over to the west coast, and they go off through 10,000 Islands and off through Everglades. They go right across the Keys and head toward Cuba. But before they do that, a lot of them do this. This is a bird we tagged on the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge last summer, and his nest did okay, all ready to go, and did this. So this is now July, early August, wound up on the border of North and South Carolina, and that's not unusual. Before they actually have to go south, and they're migrating early, so they've got some time, they'll do these exploratory flights. Sometimes they go over here, they go up above the fall line, up into Piedmont of Georgia and South Carolina. They're probably just checking out what else is out there. Is there other good habitat? Are there mates? Are there other swallow-tailed kites? Remember, they're very, very social. If something goes wrong in a place they've used for years, they want to know where they can move to. Not surprising. I assume that that's an explanation for this. And the fact that they can fly long distances very efficiently. This is, we've tagged over 80 birds with satellite or cell phone tracking devices. This is half of those going across Cuba. They don't necessarily land on Cuba, some do, but mostly they just fly. You know, they can see the coast from there. If they were to encounter bad winds, it would be pretty easy to turn in and seek refuge. But here's where they really are headed, the Yucatan Peninsula, and this is a true stopover point. Migratory birds have places they like to stop, rest, get food, get water before they continue on. In this case, they've just made a 500 to 600 mile water crossing, and they're resting before they continue all the way down into Central America. Note these birds tagged over here in Louisiana, they go over land. They don't want to cross water except this one bird, and he got it right the next year and has gone over land since. But raptors don't like to cross water. Swallowtails do, peregrine falcons do. But as you can see, they seek the shortest routes across, and in this case, they could have gone over here and crossed water, or they could just do this and stay over land. And that population always does that, and they enjoy higher survival because flying across the water, as you'll see, is very risky. This is what the whole migration route looks like, and these are the birds that we've had tagged as of last November. These 7 birds. They're named after the places they were tagged. These are not our grandchildren or anything like that. So it's, yeah, no offense, sorry, but we just don't do that. And there are good reasons. Birds die, and then what do you say? Excuse me, Joyce? I have some bad news. Joyce fell in the Gulf of Mexico after 4 days and nights. Panther Refuge, Sawgrass in Pinellas County, St. Pete, etc. Carlton Reserve. So this is the whole migration route, and this is where they winter. 5,000 miles away. None of this was known until 1996 when we started using satellite transmitters. And this is where they wind up wintering, and each of these are the color-coded birds there. There's actually 2 areas several hundred miles apart where they focus. And what they do is they use family-owned cattle ranches that look a whole lot like traditional cattle ranches in Florida. They love this habitat. And remember the early pictures I showed you of nest habitat, they've got this diversity. Wetlands, grasslands, termite mounds all over this, lots of emergent termites. They've got this 2 kinds of forest, more open and more closed canopy. They roost over here, and they feed along this floodplain. However, just like here, this is not the greatest way to make a living, growing cows. It's more lucrative to do industrial agriculture that produces soybeans or sugar canes, things that are really in demand. And when you look out the other side of the airplane, down there in Brazil, you see this, and then you see this. And this is international industrial agriculture at its most efficient and, unfortunately, destructive. Destructive for one bird in particular, the Day, who was tagged over in Daytona Beach. And we named them after the places partly so that older ones among us can remember where the birds were tagged as we follow them, because we follow them for, these transmitters last 5 or 6 years, they're solar powered, but also save the places where they are. That, for swallow-tailed kites, the best management recommendation I can give you. But you know, I could say that about any other bird, and probably a whole lot of other species. They're telling us what they need. But our plans are really at odds with that simple strategy, unfortunately. So here we are down in Brazil, we lose a bird, her transmitter is motionless, still transmitting. It's in this, this is all soybean production. This is an indigenous reserve, tribal indigenous tribes in Brazil. So that's intact and should remain protected for now. But we had good friends down there who went and looked for this bird. They couldn't find it, but they did find the herbicides that were sprayed on this field the week the bird apparently died.
Oh my God.
So they have maybe 3 crops on this ground over a year. They spray Roundup on it after they harvest it. They punch holes in the ground, drop seeds, and they don't even till it. And as the plants started to emerge, in this case, they had an insect outbreak, and they spent the money to spray it, and that's when this bird we had tracked for 5 years apparently died.
Poor bullfrog.
And that wasn't bullfrog, but yeah, you'll see what happened to bullfrog now. Okay, so they're down in South America, they're coming home. They start north. 5,000 miles south, it takes them 2.5 months. They feed along the way. They're going to be on vacation when they get there. It looks like the trip is, once they get across the water, is there's no hurry. You know, it's not the destination, it's the journey sort of thing. However, they're down here, the days start getting longer, hormones start kicking in, and they move very quickly going north. They make this whole journey in about a month to 6 weeks. And the closer they get to the north, the faster they go. But the dead man's curve of kite migration, as we've come to think of it, is right here. Because when they get back to the Gulf, orange is north, green is southbound. You can see here they stick to land, it's a safe route. Going north, they just leave the Yucatan on any tailwind, any bit of wind that's not coming from up here, but somewhere back here. They leave and they just stay aloft as long as they can, and odds are they will eventually hit this safety net of land created by the Gulf of Mexico. It's amazing. You know, it would be very hard to find the tip of Cuba. It'd be very hard to find the Florida Keys. That's not a great way to navigate. But if you leave here and just go north, you'll eventually make landfall somewhere. And I love this picture because it makes a very moving and important point, I think, perfectly clear. This is 5 different birds, each a different color. They all get there in different ways. This bird has such good tailwinds it never even went over land. So it got to Cuba, took a break. But they're all moving north, and as you can see, they all turn very decidedly. There's no equivocating there. The end of each of these colored lines is exactly where each respective bird nested the year before. So they hit land and they immediately turn, and I mean usually it's within hours or immediately. They might arrive in the night and they'll turn in the proper direction and start heading for home, and one of their homes. This is what happens over the Gulf though sometimes. This bird left on a tailwind, so you had a high pressure system here creating a tailwind right here. That's what these little arrows indicate, the wind direction. But right behind this high pressure system that's moving this way is another one coming down, rotating clockwise. So as this bird goes out, it's in tailwinds, but as these highs move this way, as they do, it hits headwinds. And that's what happened here. So we went from this map to this map, all headwinds. Bird turned in place for 3 more days and nights, disappeared. Out of the 80 birds that we've tracked, I immediately was able to count up 15 that had died in this way. And some of the others were a little equivocal, but probably, at least in most of those cases. This happened in 2013, I believe. Yeah, March of 2013. And these maps are the second, third, and fifth, 7th of March. Look at this high pressure system here that extends all the way down here. It created these strong northerly winds. This was about a 12-day period where all the winds, the dominant winds, were from the north. And this is what happens when that happens. This is bullfrog. So bullfrog left on day 1, let's say March 10th, left the Yucatan, went north, doing great, hit headwinds, turned in the correct direction. It only had to get over here to Tampa. But then it encountered northerly winds, went this way. This is what Vicki was reading about when we wrote about this. Got down within 25 miles, we thought it'll just go onto the Yucatan. Boogied out here. Instead, northerly winds, just a little bit of a northerly component there. Wound up out here, turned in place, the signal ceased. That's what this is a close-up of. That was the end of bullfrog. This is a bird from Miami. Look what she did. She got in the same problem, but it was able to get on to Cuba. We thought, oh, this is great. You know, it was a boy, actually. Just go right there and be home. No. The wind was from the southeast, so took the wind. Take a tailwind and stay aloft. Wound up on the Mississippi River Delta, came over, and then went out over the water again. And got here and turned right toward home, out over the Gulf. Same thing happened a few days later with Panther. Panther's trying to get up here, wound up finding refuge on Cuba. We thought, that's it. He's just going to go right up here to the Big Cypress. He'll be home. But no. That's what he did. He left Cuba, started here, got a strong east wind out back into the Gulf, and fortunately made it up there. This is what we like to see, and this just happened between the 15th and the 31st of March. This is a bird from South Carolina. She got on the Yucatan, felt a tailwind, she left, did this little jog, and then just had a great wind the whole way right up to land. And that's, yeah, I'm not done yet. Almost. I'm not going to tell you all this about snail kites, but these are other species we're studying. Snail kites, satellite tracking, you know what? Most of the time, they're not on the publicly owned lands that we spend millions of dollars, literally, monitoring and managing for snail kites. And this is still hasn't gotten through to a lot of people. This year, that's a caracara. This year we looked at the birds that we're still tracking of an original sample of 22. There's 4 birds left. 83% of their time during the snow kite breeding season, they're not on these managed lands. They're on agricultural lands, or on canals, or on retention ponds in neighborhoods, etc. They're eating exotic snails. This is an endangered species. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the snail kite being listed as endangered. And now their global population is declining. So we've actually been asked to do quite a bit of work with the reddish egret. We're doing a prey study now. This is tracking we did on ding darling, and we learned that they really do concentrate in their specific areas. They don't go far. This is our newest colleague, R.M. Jimenez. Dr. Jimenez is from University of Havana, now lives in the United States, and is studying the same birds we're studying in Cuba with his grad students. And we started a program 2 years ago to help support this financially by raising money here to help them do more to protect their wildlands in Cuba, which are just like ours. And the population, you know, we have much to do in Florida, no doubt, but the thing is, the species in Cuba that have healthy populations, like the reddish egrets, are doing quite well. That's going to be the founder population that's going to colonize our habitats when we keep getting it wrong and eventually have to recover the species. They have magnificent frigate birds, which we also study. They have white-crowned pigeons. They have mangrove cuckoos. Nobody knows where they winter. We put this little 2-gram satellite transmitter on. We were asked to test this prototype. We're now doing that on ding darling. Frigate birds, nobody knew where all the frigate birds were from, but they're not from the only U.S. colony, which is out here in the Dry Tortugas, a little spit of land where there's 100 pairs. That's the whole U.S. breeding population. We've undertaken a project. These birds, by the way, that winter in Florida are from the Western Caribbean breeding population. We figured that out by tagging them. And now what we're doing, this is my favorite project of the moment, we're trying to lure magnificent frigate birds on to safe nesting islands. Why are you laughing? Those are frigate birds. See, you got that. I usually put this picture up and I say, okay, this is the young of the year, and he's real comfortable with these females and these males. Oh, and look at this male's displaying. Well, this is the only live bird in the picture. They don't breed till they're 5 to 10 years old, so we're training them, we're attracting them to these islands with the decoys and with solar-powered automated playback systems that are quite elaborate. And we're trying to establish new colonies on 5 islands in the lower Keys, where the Keys refuges, our property, National Wildlife Refuge, are managing these islands and protecting them so that these birds can nest. And these are our Cuban colleagues, 2 students, Alieni and Ianoa. Alieni Gonzalez studies reddish egrets, Ianoa studies the Cuban martin, and these are the 2 projects right now that we're investing as much as we possibly can in, and allowing Arium, supporting Arium so he can move back and forth and continue to finish up these wonderful students. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to you.